Heavenly King, Comforter, Spirit of Truth, art everywhere present and fill us all things, treasury of good things and giver of life, come and dwell within us and cleanse us of all impurity and save our souls, O good one. Holy God, holy mighty, holy immortal, have mercy on us. Glory to the Father, and to the Son, and to the Holy Spirit, both now and ever and unto the ages of ages. Amen. Welcome back to Reason and Theology, everyone. Your host, Michael. We are talking about private masses being done in disobedience to a bishop. Are they possible? Are they licit? Are they moral? Especially in context of TLM masses in maybe a diocese where a bishop has restricted the TLM. You know, is it licit for a priest to do to still say these things in disobedience to his bishop? We're talking about that today. Before we do so, let me go ahead and just mention to everybody to pray for the repose of the soul of David Bawden. A lot of y'all probably know him as Pope Michael. He was an individual who believed that he was the Pope. I know we all know that it's an absurd thesis. At the same time, this is a real person. He really did mean well. He had good intentions. We might think that it's, the position that he maintained was untenable, but we need to recognize this was a real person who was sincere, and we need to pray for the repose of his soul. So I asked that everybody would do that. I saw the news last night, and I was sad to see that. I mean, obviously, I don't agree with this position, and I don't think it was tenable. But at the same time, in the little interaction with him that I had, I could tell that, he was sincere. I mean, some people were sincerely wrong, but at the same time, he was sincere. So I don't think that he was just trying to be, against the Pope or something like that. I think he felt that he was doing the right thing. And so we need to pray for somebody like that. And again, the repose of their soul. So please keep him in mind. I don't know exactly when he passed away. Like I said, I just saw the news last night, and so I'm not familiar with all of the details, but I imagine you can go online and find out a little bit more. But I was just sad to see it. I mean, it sounds like he was a really good guy. And, like I said, some good people can be really mistaken. But that doesn't take away from the fact that, they at least appear to be good people. And from what I could tell, there's a lot of people on social media saying, I don't agree with him, but I've talked to him in person and I visited with him and he was really good. He was so kind. He was really gentle, blah, blah, blah. So there's just a lot of people that testify that, this was a good guy. So let's keep him in mind. Let's keep him in our prayers. Okay, let's begin here. So let me, by the way, somebody said RNT now has 22,000 subs. Yes. Thank you all for everybody who has subscribed. I really appreciate it. If you aren't subscribed, about 40% of my audience is not subscribed. Hit that subscribe button. 60% of y'all, however, are. So thank y'all so much. It does help the channel grow and to be shared more on YouTube and social media and reach a larger audience. So I would certainly appreciate hitting that subscribe button. Let me again preface my comments by saying, as I've done in the last few shows, and I'm going to continue to do it until we get this through our heads and we stop committing this the confusion between the two things that I'm about to address. I'm going to criticize the position of some people. I am not attacking those people. Those are not the same thing. And like I said, I'm going to continue to reiterate that every episode until we get that down. Criticizing a person's view does not mean you are criticizing them as a person or attacking them. It's not the same thing. We have to learn the difference. Now, whenever we criticize their view, it needs to be charitable. I mean, we can sometimes cross that line to where we end up criticizing their view in such a way that it ends up attacking their person. I mean, that's possible as well. So we have to be careful in the way that we do it. I'm certainly going to try to be careful to maintain that standard and just deal with um, the view, and not necessarily with any people that are as far as their intentions, their motives, their personality, their own soul. I'm not going to try to touch on those issues. So with that being said, let's continue. I want to share what precipitated this. Let me share my screen. This is a picture I remember seeing a while back when, I was a radical traditionalist. I remember seeing this picture and it broke my heart. It still breaks my heart. It really does. This is a picture of a priest being arrested, evidently, so the story goes. I haven't checked the facts, but let's just use it as a scenario. I'm going to assume that the facts are accurate. But again, we're even if they're not, we're still going to address the scenario. But allegedly, this is a priest around the time of the reforms of the Second Vatican Council and the new liturgy. The priest was being disobedient to his bishop, who restricted the TLM, and the priest did not have authorization to say the TLM, the Tridentine Mass, but was supposed to say the Novus Ordo, and he disobeyed his bishop and still said the Tridentine Mass anyway. And his bishop allegedly called the police to escort him from the altar. So evidently here, Brother Martin, I don't know a whole lot about this individual or whether he's in good standing with the church or not. I haven't really looked a whole lot into him. So I'm not in any way endorsing his content. Like I said, there could be some concerns with this individual. I'm just using this as an example, however, to address the scenario. So this might be a great brother. This might not be a brother at all, as far as a person who's part of religious orders. I don't know. I don't know his situation. He could be in good standing with his bishop. He might not be in good standing. I don't know. But just because it's on my screen doesn't mean I'm endorsing him, because I haven't really looked into him. His bishop forbade him to offer the Tridentine Mass to implement the Novus Ordo. Rather than close his doors, why does it have to be closing your doors? Couldn't you celebrate the Novus Ordo? See, that doesn't make sense. Rather than close his doors, this priest offered the Tridentine Mass anyway. His bishop called the police to escort him from the altar. Again, it broke my heart when I originally saw it, because it's just so sad that, the police have to get involved with disputes in the church. And my original impression when I saw this as a radical traditionalist was to be angry that a bishop would do this to his priest. Having learned some additional things since then, which I'm going to go over today, it still breaks my heart. But I at least can say, although it's unfortunate that a bishop would have to do this, I can understand why. And I don't think that this priest, assuming the situation is accurate, I don't think that the priest was in the right. In other words, I would have thought back in the day that the bishop was in the wrong. I would actually say, no, it's the priest who's in the wrong, and here's why. We often, when it comes to these discussions, are driven by emotion, and we're lacking in basic catechesis and basic canon law. The catechism, canon law, the history of the church tradition would say what this priest did was wrong. It was not justified in any kind of way. But again, we often lack that basic catechesis, and we're going based on emotions. So that's what I want to do today. Now, there's another one that I also saw on social media. Again, I don't know about this priest, good standing, not in good standing. I don't know. I'm not really looking into these individuals. But this is Father V. I just saw it come up on my social media, which is why I bring it up. But he's saying back to the catacombs of the 70s as a family converts their living room into a chapel for the offering of the TLM. My impression is he's saying back to the catacombs. We're back to celebrating the TLM against the directives of our bishop. That's my impression, because otherwise, why would you need to have it in your living room and turn your living room into a chapel unless this is going to be done in defiance and disobedience to the bishop? Again, I don't know all of the scenarios with this house chapel here. I'm just saying the impression that I'm getting is that this priest is effectively saying, look, whenever your bishop restricts the TLM, back to your living rooms, and we're going to have to celebrate it in disobedience to our bishop. I hope I've represented them correctly. If that's not their situation, all right, well, then I'm just addressing that situation. But that's, again, the impression that I'm getting. It's the impression that many people are getting on social media when this stuff floats and circulates around the internet. You can see 82 retweets. It's certainly circulating. And this was July 25th. It also reminds me of something that I heard from Michael Davies a while back. I used to be a huge fan of Michael Davies, who again was a promoter of Lefebvre, of the sspx. I used to be really big into Michael Davies. This was probably 2014, 2015. And I remember listening to a talk that he gave. And in the talk, he was saying, in the case of a bishop who's just a really bad bishop, he's not a good man, he's an immoral man, a priest who is under the authority of that bishop may need to remove himself from that bishop, and that priest needs to take his flock and celebrate mass outside of communion with his bishop. And everybody in the audience began to cheer and shout, in acclamations of endorsing what he was saying. And I remember at the time thinking, well, I don't know. I mean, I kind of am sympathetic to what he's saying, but then again, there's something that doesn't sound right about this in light of Ignatius of Antioch in the 2nd century and his understanding of the priesthood in relation to the bishop. There's just something about this that isn't sitting well with me, but I couldn't really express it, even though I'd read the catechism. I guess I just didn't recall some of the aspects of the catechism that address this. And of course, it's not just the catechism that addresses it, but there was something that wasn't sitting well with me. And that's kind of what I want to go over. What is exactly the problem of such situations? Can priests celebrate a liturgy outside of the permission of their bishop, or against the permission of their bishop? Can a priest do that? Let's go to the Catechism of the Catholic Church. Let's start there. Just very, like I said, very basic stuff here. Somebody says, please talk about blind disobedience or blind obedience. I'll address that rhetoric, John Boy Sr. Don't worry, but I'm not advocating blind obedience. And I think that I don't know if you're being derogatory, but I think that term is derogatory. So I think we should dial that rhetoric back a little bit. And if you consider, and again, I don't know what your position is, John Boy, I'm just saying, if your position that obeying the church when you're supposed to obey the church is blind obedience, then I think you need to look further into this issue. Let's zoom in here and make the text larger, and let me share my screen. We're going to go to the Catechism of the Catholic Church, 1564. I find this to be helpful. It expresses, again, what we're seeing as early as Ignatius of Antioch in the 2nd century, who was a disciple of Polycarp, who was a disciple of the Apostle John. And somebody's asking about masses during lockdown. Are they illicit? That's a separate question. Perhaps we can do a show on it, because I was going to address that, however. So you're getting ahead of me here. But I was going to address how that is a separate issue than what we're currently discussing. And I'll explain why a little bit later whenever I've laid the foundation for what we're discussing first. But perhaps we can treat that as a whole show in its own, because it certainly is worth treatment. Okay. But right now we're talking about a situation where your bishop is telling the priest to celebrate the Novus Ordo and not giving them permission to celebrate the TLM. And the priest says, nope, I'm going to go and celebrate the TLM against my bishop. That's the scenario we're discussing. It's not the same as the scenario you're describing. However, the conclusion may be the same, but the scenario you're describing is different, because now you're talking about not offering the sacrament at all versus it's available. Okay. All right, let's talk about Catechism of the Catholic Church 1564. Whilst not having the supreme degree of the pontifical office, and notwithstanding the fact that they depend on the bishops in the exercise of their own proper power. Did you hear that? Wait. Did you hear that? The priest depends on the bishops in their exercise of their own proper power. The priests are for all that associated with them by reason of their sacerdotal dignity, and in virtue of the sacrament of holy orders after the image of Christ, the supreme and eternal priest, they are consecrated in order to preach the gospel and shepherd the faithful, as well as celebrate divine worship as true priests of the New Testament. Let's also look at Catechism of the Catholic Church 1567, right beneath it. The priests, prudent cooperators of the Episcopal College and its support and instrument, called to the service of the people of God, constitute together with their bishop a unique sacerdotal college dedicated, it is true, to a variety of distinct duties. In each local assembly of the faithful, they represent in a certain sense the bishop with whom they are associated in all trust and generosity. In part, they take upon themselves his duties in solicitude, and in their daily toils discharge them. Priests can exercise their ministry only in dependence of the bishop and in communion with them. The promise of obedience they make to the bishop at their moment of their ordination, and the kiss of peace from him at the end of the ordination liturgy means that the bishop considers them his co-workers, his sons, his brothers, his friends, and that they in return owe him love and obedience. Let me just stop there and just make a couple points before we continue. What was the purpose of the priesthood? I mean, you read Ignatius of Antioch again, disciple of Polycarp, was a disciple of the Apostle John. In the earliest days of the church, you have explanations of the purpose of the priesthood, and that is to be in the place of the bishop, because the bishop can't be at every altar on Sunday. You can only be at one place at one time. Well, what about all the other congregations where the bishop can't be present? The priesthood is to represent the bishop, and it is to serve in his place. But the priest cannot act outside of his bishop because he is the one representing his bishop. He has also made certain promises of obedience to his bishop at the moment of ordination, because he's not this separate autonomous entity that gets to celebrate the Mass whenever he wants. His whole purpose is to celebrate the Mass for the bishop in his absence. So the bishop gets to determine when he is going to do it, how, where, things like that. He is not to be disobedient to his bishop, because that defeats the very purpose of it. And then that's why Ignatius of Antioch talks about how not being with your bishop and being disobedient to your bishop is being disobedient to Christ. So here we have an alter Christus, the priest, who's serving in the place of Christ, going against Christ, because the bishop represents Christ too, as Ignatius of Antioch notes. So here you have Christ going against Christ. Something's not right about that, which is exactly why a priest is not to be disobedient to his bishop, because now you have a case where one who is supposed to be the image of Christ is disobeying the ultimate image of Christ in a diocese, in a local church. That is the bishop. It's chaos. It's disorder. It should not be done. It's immoral. It's sinful. And again, Ignatius of Antioch has a whole lot of things to say about people who are going against the bishop. Now, we'll address in a moment, what about when the bishop is, using an unjust law or something like that? I'll address that, but hold your horses. We're still talking about just general principles here. There's another one to briefly look at here. All priests who are constituted in the order of the priesthood by the sacrament of order are bound together by an intimate sacramental brotherhood, but in a special way, they form one priestly body in the diocese to which they are attached under their own bishop. The unity of the presbyterium finds liturgical expression in the customs of the presbyters imposing hands after the bishop during the rite of ordination. But again, notice that. Under their bishop. Obedience. Promise of obedience. Acting in the person of Christ. And then they are fulfilling his ministry. That is the bishop. Because again, the bishop can't be everywhere on Sunday. So he has priests to represent him and celebrate the liturgy for him. I also want to look at the code of canon law that will address disobeying your bishop. What happens here when we disobey the bishop? Go to the code of canon law, canon 1373. Let's start there. Pull it up here, 1373. Share my screen again. No, I recognize that there's more to these issues. Again, unjust laws. What do we do about that? What happens if your bishop binds you to something that, is overruled by a higher authority, such as the Pope? I mean, I'll address all that. We're talking about first, however, basic principles of obedience and disobedience. And then we'll ask the question of whether or not it is just to disobey a bishop in celebrating the TLM when he's telling you to celebrate the Novus Ordo. All right. Let's see here. 1373. A person who publicly incites among subjects animosities or hatred against the Holy See. Sounds like some YouTubers. Who incites among subjects animosity or hatred against the Pope. Reminds me of YouTubers. Not all, but a few. Or an ordinary, that is going to be roughly a bishop. It could be not just a bishop. There are some priests who are ordinaries, but for the most part, these tend to be bishops. So, and the apostolic see or an ordinary, because of some act of power or ecclesiastical ministry, or provokes subjects to disobey them. So we're talking about disobeying Pope, disobeying bishops, is to be punished by an interdict or other just penalties. One criticism that I have with the Code of Canon Law is the ambiguous a just penalty. Can we just get specific with the penalties and not make it just so general and whatever? That's a whole nother discussion. But they're to be punished with an interdict or another just penalty. Right. So there are canonical penalties that are owed for those who incite hatred against the apostolic see. By the way, I think that there's an update also to this canon that's even a little bit more strict that the Pope put out not long ago. What I'm saying here hasn't substantially changed, so that's why I'm just going to this. But again, there's a penalty for those who incite hatred against the Pope or the bishop or the ordinary, and also for those who disobey them. Interdict or some other just penalty. Serious stuff. Let's also look at Canon 1371. The following are to be punished with a just penalty. There we go with the ambiguous penalties here, but just penalty, whatever that may be. In addition to the case mentioned in Canon 1364, paragraph 1, a person who teaches a doctrine condemned by the Roman Pontiff or an ecumenical council, or who obstinately rejects the doctrine mentioned in Canon 750, paragraph 2, or in Canon 752, which this applies to some YouTubers, by the way, and who does not retract after having been admonished by the apostolic see or an ordinary, here's the penalty. A person who otherwise does not obey a legitimate precept, or I'm sorry, it's mentioning this person is supposed to be under a penalty. This person, or a person who otherwise does not obey a legitimate precept. So we're not talking about illegitimate precepts, but we're talking about a legitimate precept. And again, in a moment, we're going to ask, if your bishop says don't celebrate the TLM, celebrate the Novus Ordo, is that a legitimate precept? Or prohibition of the apostolic see. An ordinary or a superior, and who persists in disobedience after a warning. So the person who, is going against the legitimate precept of a bishop, the apostolic see, an ordinary, a superior, and persists in it, is subject to a just penalty. Okay, so it's serious stuff because, again, there could be canonical penalties involved, according, again, to canon law. It's important stuff. Now, this is especially applicable for priests, right? Although some of this applies to laity as well. But in what we're discussing here, we're discussing in the context of a priest, because the priest is the one who would be celebrating the TLM against the permission of his bishop. So we're specifically talking about priests more than how this applies to laity. Let's address the issue of an unjust law is no law at all. And let's also address the issue of what happens when you have a higher law that says one thing and a lower law that says another. Well, if a higher law, that is a law from God, or maybe a law of the apostolic see, says one thing, and then a bishop says something else, obviously you're going to go with a higher law, right? So the bishop can't go against what the Pope is saying, and the Pope can't go against what God is saying. So the Pope can't tell you to rape somebody. That goes against a higher law. Or the bishop can't tell you to do something that the Holy See has already given you permission to do. In the case of the celebration of the TLM, the Holy See has restricted the celebration of the TLM to certain limited circumstances, and has also given the local bishop authority in this area, in some matters related to it. If the bishop restricts the TLM in his diocese, might we say that's not a good idea? Perhaps. Might we say that's imprudent? Perhaps. But is he acting within the law? He's certainly acting within what the apostolic see has said, and within his own authority as a bishop. So you can't say he's overruled by the apostolic see in restricting the TLM in his diocese. So now you have to ask the question, is he overruled by God? No, he's not overruled by God either. Because God nowhere tells us that you have to celebrate the TLM versus the Novus Ordo, unless you have certain assumptions that the Novus Ordo is inherently sinful, which I've already addressed in a previous video, or is inherently harmful, which I've already addressed in a previous video. I'll put them in the show notes. Or you think that, well, the church also teaches that every person in their right is entitled to the sacraments in their right. And you think the Roman rite as promulgated by Paul VI is a different rite than the Roman rite promulgated by Pius V. That's also inherently flawed, as I've discussed in a previous video, which I'll also link in this one. No point in reinventing the wheel on every one of those claims. The Roman rite by Paul VI is substantially the same as the one promulgated by Pius V, the Tridentine Mass. Might we say that Paul VI Missal needs some tweaking? Might we say that there were some better things in the TLM than in Paul VI Missal? Sure. But it's still substantially the same rite. So whenever a bishop is saying you need to celebrate the Novus Ordo and you don't have permission to say the TLM, he has that right because the Roman Rite is still made available to people in the Latin Rite. It's still there. It's in the Missal of Paul VI. So he's not telling them you can't celebrate according to your own rite. You do have the opportunity to celebrate in your own right. Another question is, well, what about an unjust law? An unjust law is no law at all. I mean, again, this assumes that it is an unjust law. And my concern here is, are you as the private individual determining what is the unjust law? That's a slippery slope. That's going to be really, really tough to do. Maybe in some cases that's obvious, such as a bishop tells you to rape somebody. I think you could then privately say, in your private interpretation, if you will, that, okay, that's an unjust law because it's clearly, explicitly against what God has said. But in less than explicit cases, and what we're discussing here is certainly less than explicit, do you get to privately determine what's an unjust law from your bishop? Would that not result in chaos? That's a slippery slope. If you now get to determine what's an unjust law when it's not that clear cut, such as the scenario we're describing with a bishop restricting the TLM, if it's really up to you as an individual to determine those things, it's only a matter of time before you're going to really leave communion with your local bishop and pope. Because if you're determining that, we're back to Protestantism. Right back to Protestantism with its private interpretation, private judgments. It's going to lead ultimately to schism. Whenever I think that my bishop is wrong, I get to disobey him because it's an unjust law. We would have chaos in the church. Now, again, the question of who gets to determine it is unjust in cases that are less than explicit results in a slippery slope. I also want to point to individuals like Padre Pio. In his case, I think that when he was restricted from saying Mass at all, seems unjust. Seems unjust. What was his response? Did he say, an unjust law, no law at all, and I'm still going to celebrate Mass? No. No, he was obedient. And I say that we need to imitate the same thing in cases where it's not explicit. That is, a bishop is not asking you to do something that is contrary to what God has taught or the Holy See says explicitly. And might we say, well, in the case of Padre Pio, I think it's explicit. Might we argue that? Again, what did Padre Pio do? Did he argue that? Or did he take the path of sanctity? And he was obedient. He was obedient. And he was then vindicated that he shouldn't have been treated that way. And we recognize his sanctity because of that. Now, if Padre Pio had been disobedient, I don't know if he would have been canonized. Maybe he would. Maybe he wouldn't have. But I think it would be certainly less certain at that point that he would have been canonized. Where does this lead? An unjust law is no law at all. Where does this lead? Could not Martin Luther justify his actions with such rhetoric? An unjust law is no law at all. What you're asking me to do is wrong. Could not Martin Luther say the same thing? Where does this lead us? So I don't think that in this case we could appeal to an unjust law is no law at all. And I don't think in this case we could appeal to a higher law that overrules the bishop, because neither the Holy See nor God has said otherwise. Now, somebody asked me about a different circumstance. What about if a bishop tells you to offer no Mass at all, and doesn't make the sacraments available for the laity at all in the entire diocese? That deserves its own treatment. But now we're running up against other things in canon law that is above the local bishop. Now we do have instances of higher law that would seem to overrule the local bishop there, because there are some things in canon law promulgated again by a higher law, that is the Apostolic See, that notes that the laity are entitled to these sacraments. So now we might be able to use that argument of, well, a higher law is explicitly overruling you, bishop, But again, in this case, is there anything explicitly overruling the bishop and his restriction of the TLM? Not only is there not, there is a higher law that is Traditionis Custodes promulgated by the Pope that seems to say, confirms what the bishop is doing. Now, that being said, Should the Pope restrict the TLM? Should the bishop restrict the TLM? Those are different questions, and I've addressed that before. I'll again put a link to those in the show notes. Was Traditionis Custodes the most prudential thing to do? Is it the most timely? Should this have been done? We can certainly ask that question, but can it be done? Can they enforce these things? That's a different question. Now, you might say, okay, well, maybe if something shouldn't be done, that means they can't do it. That is not necessarily true. Because just because something might not be timely, just because something might not be prudent, doesn't mean that the person who imposes that law is not acting within their law. And the magisterium certainly bears that out. Again, donum veritatis. So I think we get into fundamental and deeper problems at that point if we want to start saying, well, because I think the Pope shouldn't do this, or the bishop shouldn't do this, because I prudentially think it shouldn't be done, I get to disobey the bishop or the Pope. That's also problematic, because that's not only not allowed by the magisterium itself, slippery slope. You end up in Protestantism at that point. Okay, so because I personally think that the bishop or the Pope is imprudent for this, I'm not going to obey them. Where does that lead? That leads to schism. So when I see individuals on social media calling people to disobedience from their bishop and the Pope, I'm just saying, you know what? You don't have that authority. First of all, it's wrong. It's immoral. It's certainly not something that canon law or God backs up. And it's urging people to then be disobedient to lawful authority, which is subject to canonical penalties and could eventually lead to schism. It's certainly schismatic to an extent in action, but it could actually lead to full-blown schism. So when I see people sharing this stuff on social media, what I'm seeing is them urging people to be disobedient to Christ, because ultimately, if you're disobedient to your bishop or disobedient to the Pope in areas that they have the authority to bind your conscience and to expect obedience, you're now disobeying Christ, because they represent Christ in their office. So when you resist them, you're now resisting Christ. So again, what I'm saying on social media, I know it's not the intention, but I'm seeing people urging people to resist Christ in the name of tradition. That's not tradition. Tradition does not say resist Christ. They'll do it in the name of sanctity. Sanctity does not say resist Christ. This is not the way that we should go. Might we have problems with some of the restrictions? Yeah, I think you can. Might we have concerns? Yeah, I think you can, but I think you need to express them in a way that doesn't expect us to disobey Christ and doesn't expect us to sin and doesn't lead us away from the path of holiness. We need to work within holiness, within what the church has given us, to call on our bishops, to let them know our needs, to let them know we would like to have the traditional Latin Mass, a misnomer, but to let them know these things. But if we continue to take the approach that we're often taking, the one that I'm saying again on social media, that's very common. If we continue to take that approach, as I've said before, and I'm going to continue to reiterate it, we're proving them right. Because the whole reason why Traditionis Custodes restricted the TLM is because of people who are using the TLM to be disobedient to the magisterium. And if we're calling on people to be disobedient to the magisterium and continue to celebrate the TLM against the bishops, that's proving the Pope right. It's proving the bishops right. How about we prove them wrong and show them that we're holy and show them that we're obedient and show them that we won't go against Christ, but we'll make our needs known within the bounds that God has given us in his church and within the path of sanctity. How about we do that? Somebody said, "Oh, well, it's ridiculous to think that if we are obedient and show them a life of sanctity, that's going to change the bishop's mind." And I'm just thinking, you underestimate the power of sanctity and the power of obedience to God and Christ. I mean, you underestimate those things. Don't underestimate the power of obedience and the power of sanctity. Stay within the confines of God's will and let him fight your battles for you. But don't try to step out of God's authority and God's will and try to fight against evil. You will lose every time, because the forces of evil are much stronger than we are. Now, in Christ, within God's will, nothing can come against us. But we remove ourselves from God's shelter and take ourselves out of that path, you've lost at that point. Looking through the chat here, see what we got. I imagine there's some people who are upset about what I'm saying, but again, I think it needs to be said. And once again, to reiterate, I'm not attacking any individual. I'm not attacking anyone's, I'm not judging anyone's motives or their eternal soul. But what I am doing is I'm judging what is being said and where this objectively leads. I am doing that, and I will continue to do that. Well, this is a good question. How can we say that we're entitled to the sacraments if we're not strictly owed anything by God? I mean, this is coming straight out of canon law that mentions that we are. So positive law is telling us that we are. And might we even argue by divine law that there's a certain entitlement? Yeah, not strictly entitled. We're not strictly entitled to anything other than what is just. And what is just might be eternity in hell. So we're not strictly entitled to anything good. I mean, otherwise it wouldn't be grace. But within the dispensation, if you will, of grace, within grace, there might be certain relative entitlements, not, again, strictly speaking. It's kind of like merit. We don't strictly merit anything, but we can speak of a qualified version of merit. Somebody says, "Thank you, Michael, for these live streams. Godly behavior encouraged obedience and reverence." Thank you. Let's see here. What is this question? Is it not fitting that the Roman Rite should be united under Sacrosanctum Concilium Novus Ordo Mass, since it is the official Mass for the Catholic Church in the interest of unity? I'm not sure I'm following your question. If you can maybe just clarify that a little bit for me. Desert says, "Gotta agree with you, Mike. I'm surprised. I thought that everybody would crucify me for this, but I'm sure some people still will." Let's see. Michael, the chat is going to be upset. Lord of the Rings TV show is trash. Is it really? Oh, that's disappointing to hear. I was going to get Prime just to watch it. Is it really? Well, I'm sad to hear that. I like Lord of the Rings. I thought it would have been good. Are you sure? I'm still gonna try it. I don't know if I trust your judgment in shows yet, Sean. I'll have to check it out myself. Let's see. Looking through the chat. What else we got? That's disappointing. Where have you been, Michael? I don't know what that's in reference to, Germanicus. Okay, so somebody's saying down with the TLM Novus. I don't agree with that position. I don't think that the TLM right now should be absolutely suppressed. I don't think that's a good idea, because we're not celebrating the Novus Ordo in the way it should be celebrated. So until then, it doesn't make sense. Now, whenever the Novus Ordo is being done properly enough that, again, in practice, it's being done properly enough, then I could see it. But that's, again, why I think that Traditionis Custodes may not be timely, because we're not in a situation where the Novus Ordo is generally being done in the way that it should be done. Just even according to the rubrics. I mean, a lot of times it's being abused, which the Pope recognizes in Traditionis Custodes. So, okay, why restrict right now the TLM? Well, his argument is Well, because you have people who are schismatics who are latching on to the TLM to be disobedient to the magisterium. Yeah, that's true. That's true. But are there other ways to maybe address those schismatics without restricting the TLM? Maybe. Maybe. I've given some alternatives. It's ultimately up to the Pope to make these decisions, not me. So he's acting within his authority, but we can certainly question whether or not he's taken the most prudential way. We need to do so carefully, respectfully, charitably, but Donum Veritatis does allow us to ask those questions. Do you think it would help the traditional cause to focus less on the TLM and more on correct Novus Ordo? Certainly would help. Certainly would help. Okay, what else we have? See something about Brother Barry in the chat. Good times, good times. Notifications aren't happening with this channel, Reason and Theology, at least for me. I've heard of that a lot. I can't do anything about it, though. Make sure you've hit the bell for notifications, but if you're not getting notifications, I don't know what's going on with YouTube. I wouldn't be surprised if I'm being shadow banned. Then again, it may be something else. I don't know. What else we have? Sean says, just prepare to know that they're adapting the show to fit modern times. Are they really doing that with Lord of the Rings? That's unfortunate. I hate to hear that. I guess we should have saw it coming, though, right? Nah, whatever. I don't like that. We're just tired of all this and really want bishops to do their duty, but you're right. Well, hey, look, I totally understand the frustration. I'm not saying you shouldn't be frustrated. Maybe you should, but that needs to be handled in a way that is within the bounds of charity and is virtuous. I mean, we could certainly be righteously upset, but it's very easy to cross the line into unrighteous anger and disobedience. And what I'm saying is we need a happy medium there. Let's not cross the line into unrighteous anger or cross the line into disobedience, but let's rightly use our frustrations in a constructive way, in a positive way. That's all I'm saying. So, I mean, I think that people can certainly think that I don't think that the bishop is, doing the right thing here and is acting prudently. But is he acting within his legal authority? Well, yeah. Do two wrongs make a right? Do I have the right to be disobedient because the Pope isn't or the bishop isn't fulfilling their duty as well as they should? Two wrongs don't make a right. Lord of the Rings went woke. Did it really? Why? C.S. Lewis. Well, no, not C.S. Lewis, but Tolkien. He's rolling over in his grave. Although they were friends, C.S. Lewis and Tolkien. Yeah, but God bless you, Michael, for having an even kill, spiritually speaking. I appreciate it. Thank you. Joan says, I'm not surprised the police were involved. How is that the right way to handle it? Okay, well, if the bishop is telling the priest not to do this and it's within his authority and the priest isn't listening, what is the bishop supposed to do? Go in there and beat him up? I mean, is the bishop supposed to go in and drag him out? I mean, what do you... Of course, you're going to have to then get the police involved, but the priest should have never put the bishop in that situation that he has to do that. And it's unfortunate because we shouldn't have to then appeal to secular authority to handle our problems in the church, as Paul in 1 Corinthians notes. So, but whenever the priest is forcing the situation, what's the bishop supposed to do? So I think it's unfortunate, but the priest is the one pushing for that He just simply shouldn't have done that. He should have listened to his bishop and celebrated the Novus Ordo in a reverent and holy way, according to the rubrics. Let's see here. Tolkien rolling over in his grave. That's soul sleep. Michael, repent. That's funny. That's funny. Is there anybody promoting soul sleep, by the way, in the Catholic Church? Is that a thing? I still remember it in Protestantism, but is that a thing in the Catholic Church? I don't think I've heard of that in the Catholic Church. I mean, how would that work with the intercession of the saints? You know, that's probably why people aren't promoting that in the Catholic Church. Jared says the shows you do on this topic are very helpful for me. Your nuanced and balanced approach has kept me from moving towards disobedience to the church. I appreciate it. That's the goal. That's the goal. And frankly, these are not topics that I like to discuss. I'd rather talk about something else. But I've noticed that it's very necessary at this point. So we're gonna continue to address it until we get it right. I don't think most Protestants believe in soul sleep. Yeah, no, the majority don't, but I have encountered it with Protestants. And you're right, Jehovah's Witnesses. I think I'd have to go back and look, but it seems like I've seen that with Jehovah's Witnesses, but I don't know for sure. What about Seventh-day Adventists? Do they maintain that? I don't know. I'd have to go back and look. The saints hear our prayers in their dreams. I don't think that's the way it works, Kurt. What's soul sleep? Oh boy, maybe we need to do a whole show on soul sleep and contra soul sleep. SDA believes soul sleep. Okay, so Tom, I think I got that one right. Mount Fellowship says SDA for sure. Okay, all right. So I was right about that one. Let's see. Thank you for the super chat, John L. Michael, what's your favorite topic to discuss on here? The magisterium. But something non-controversial about the magisterium. I don't personally enjoy addressing controversy and upsetting people. But if the truth needs to be said and it's going to upset people, it is what it is. I mean, sometimes Jesus or the saints, said things that was upsetting to people, but it needed to be said. I don't personally enjoy it though. So yeah, I like to talk about the magisterium, how the magisterium works, Eastern Catholicism, the beauty of the Byzantine liturgy, things like that. Those are things I like to talk about, but I don't get to talk about them very often because there's just so many other things that we have to deal with and address. Yeah. Okay. Looking through the chat. Fly, you fools, Sean says, in reference to the Lord of the Rings, I mean. The birds. Is that in reference to the birds that came and saved them at the end? and didn't Tolkien address the question, well, why didn't the birds come to save? And it came to save, the hobbits at the beginning or something. I think he addressed that. And I think his response was, why ask me such foolish questions? Or it was something along those lines. In other words, it was a really good question and Tolkien didn't want to answer it. And he didn't have a good answer for it. And he knew he was cornered. And he knew it was a flaw in the storyline. So he just didn't want to answer it. That's my take on Tolkien there. Prove me wrong. Let's have a debate on Tolkien's response to the question of the bird thesis. I don't like the bird thing, the Deus ex machina. I've heard it pronounced machina. Sometimes I say machina, but Deus ex machina, I've heard it pronounced. I don't like the Deus ex machina idea of the birds coming and saving the hobbits at the end. It's frustrating. And y'all know I always cheer in stories for the bad guys, so I kind of wish Sauron won and the hobbits, lost there. But you have the birds who came and saved them, unfortunately. Maybe we should rewrite the Lord of the Rings. Uh, uh, Sleep Not on the Silmarillion. I forget how to pronounce it, but I've only heard about it. It's like the stuff that tells you before Lord of the Rings and how it all works, and the setting in which it's in, and the mythology behind it all. I hear it's really boring. I can't read things that are, um, fiction. It's hard for me to read fiction. I, I, I feel like I can't do this. There's many other books in theology I need to be reading right now, so I haven't read it. People are calling me heretic for my view about the ending here of Lord of the Rings. If I had a chance to rewrite the Lord of the Rings, all of y'all would be very upset. Don't give me that authority. um Somebody says still haven't read Lord of the Rings. I've read a little of them, but I haven't been able to finish it all because, again, I can't force myself to read fiction when there's so many other theology books that I have on the list. And I'm one of those people, why read it when I can watch a movie about it? But then I know people are saying, but the book is way better than the movie. I know, I understand. But to me, it's more interesting to watch a movie than read the book about a story. So, Sean says heresy unsub. I know. Y'all are going to hate me for my views on Lord of the Rings. John Hill says, I want my super chat back. Did I answer your super chat, by the way? Let me know if I didn't answer. I think that was your super chat that I grabbed. The bad guys would win in Mike's version. Of course they would. I told you. Not in real life, but in these movies and stuff. It's always inevitable that the good person is going to win, and it's just so, to me, it makes it so boring because you just know at the last second something's going to happen and the good guy's going to win. It's just really, it's cringe for me. John L says I did answer a super chat. Okay, good. Sometimes I miss the super chat, so I had to just make sure it was yours that I answered. They would win in Michael Mofton's version. Maybe. If I ever get to rewrite Lord of the Rings, I guess we'll find out. Mike, you're the kind of person that writes movies like Funny Games. I've never seen Funny Games. I don't know what that is. I don't know what the storyline is. Never even heard of it, to be honest. Is that really a thing? Shame, Michael, read them for Lent. There's other things to read during Lent. Other things, for sure. What else we got in the chat? Making sure I'm not missing anything. John L says unsubscribed. Yeah, I mean, it is what it is. I'm going to speak the truth about the ending of The Lord of the Rings. And if you don't like it, tough. But it needs to be said. I can't stand that the birds came and saved them at the end. Are you kidding me? Are you serious? Again, it's just so ridiculous that, of course, Deus Ex Machina. Will I give comment on the Sean C? I am not ruling on the issue between Kyle and Sean. Have Jimmy gift Lord of the Rings to you on Audible. I can't do Audible books. I've tried. I can't. I would rather listen to lectures or something else. I can't do Audible books, especially on fiction. Why? My thing is, why am I reading fiction when I could be learning about nonfiction theology books that I really need to learn about? I just feel I don't have that luxury. Now, I know people say you need to balance it out. I think C.S. Lewis said you need to balance it out, but I disagree. However, they may be right. Maybe I'm wrong. But yeah, same thing with Audible books. Why am I listening to that when I can listen to a theology lecture? Now you might say, well, what about an audible book on theology like Augustine's De Trinitate? What's really, really, really boring, the one that I heard. So not that Augustine's boring, but the version that I heard is boring. Pope Michael died. Please pray for the repose of his soul. On a serious note, I mentioned that at the beginning. Please pray for his soul. We certainly should do that. Why am I assuming that there's not theology to learn by reading LOTR? There is, but it's incredibly minor compared to an actual theology book. So, and what is there really theologically in Lord of the Rings that we don't already know if we have a basic formation in catechesis? I don't know. Maybe there's something there. Pope Michael apparently recently renounced his apostasy on his deathbed, according to Militant Thomas. I don't know if that's true. I heard something along those lines that he was kind of walking back his views. I sure hope that's true. I don't know if that's true. If you can maybe find some good evidence for that, I'd love to hear that. Either way, please pray for the repose of his soul. David Bauden, I believe is how to pronounce his last name. Please pray for him. Either way. August 2nd, oddly enough, his obituary calls him Father David and makes no mention of him being Pope. But wasn't he actually consecrated validly a bishop? I thought that he was. I thought he was illicitly, though validly, consecrated a bishop. I remember there was a bishop who's not in communion who I thought had valid orders who consecrated him, but I don't know for sure about his orders. It could be that his orders weren't valid. So that would then not make him a valid bishop. Either way, pray for him. How do we approach fellow lay people who have been scandalized by news like this? Well, I mean, you could point them to some of the material where I've talked about these concerns that they'll have. But I mean, be charitable with them, be understanding. I mean, we certainly need to be understanding that they're being scandalized in some cases by things that they're legitimately concerned about. So we need to recognize that there are legitimate concerns here. We don't need to hand wave this and act like everything in the church is fine. Everything is not fine. Everything is not fine. We're going through a crisis. And anybody who's being honest recognizes we're going through a crisis, I think. Maybe there's some people who are honest who don't recognize that we're going through a crisis. I would say maybe you're uninformed. But anybody who's honest and informed, I think, recognizes we're going through a crisis. So I think that that's beyond dispute. So we can agree with them that there's certainly a crisis. There's certainly problems. The question is, how do we answer them? And we don't want to answer them in a way that is going to continue to create more problems. And that's my concern is we're all trying to deal with chaos in the church. But what I'm saying is solutions that are being proposed that is creating more chaos and is dividing the body of Christ more and that is sinning against God more and is not going to lead people to sanctity. It's going to lead them to hell. And that's my concern. We all agree there needs to be a solution, but let's not present a solution that is going to harm people. Now, if I'm wrong, maybe I'm criticizing a solution that is good and holy. Maybe so. I'm willing to stand corrected there. Surely I'm not the measure of what's right and wrong. I recognize that. So I could be wrong in my criticisms of some of these solutions. I could be wrong, but help me understand how I'm wrong. Help me. I'm trying to pursue the truth. Help me see the errors in my criticisms, Otherwise, if what I'm saying is true, I mean, it's kind of like Augustine. What wasn't it in the beginning of De Trinitate where he said this? I forget the exact words, but if I'm right, join me. If I'm wrong, correct me. Something along those lines. If somebody has the quote, maybe put it in the chat. But if I'm right, join me. If I'm wrong, correct me in charity. But it just certainly seems like a lot of the solutions that we're presenting for legitimate concerns in many cases, some of our concerns are misplaced, but some of them are legitimate concerns. It just seems like the solutions that a lot of people are presenting just create more problems. and they might be couched in the guise of tradition. They don't seem to be traditional when you look a little bit further. Maybe I'm wrong. Please help me if I am, though. I certainly don't want to be misrepresenting what God wants, right? I mean, I want to be obedient to God. I want to do his will, and I want to help others to also do his will. But if I'm misrepresenting God's will for us, then I want people to help me. And I'm not saying that I'm the voice of God's will. That's not what I'm saying. I think the magisterium, on the whole, is, and what I'm trying to present is what the magisterium seems to present, in my understanding of it. If I'm wrong, please show me. Did anybody find the Augustine quote? Maybe not. Apparently Michael renounced his apostasy and was received by a diocesan priest on his deathbed. Was he? Can you please email me that information if you have proof of that? I would just like to know. I mean, either way, we need to pray for him. I would just like to know if he did. I think that that's really good to know, because there are a lot of people that, are talking about this situation, and it'd be good to have the facts. And if that's true, I'm very thrilled to hear that, because it means we've gained a brother. But I don't know if that's true. Can you find me some concrete evidence backing that up and send it to me? Or is this just speculation? I don't know. Email it to me if you do find it, Maria, or anybody else. Email it to reasonandtheology@gmail.com. I'd like to see. Because it certainly would be encouraging to hear. David, somebody else is saying David Bottom was received by a diocesan priest on his deathbed. Again, can you please confirm that for me? I'm so happy to hear that, if that's true, because again, we gained a brother. Well, I think that's it. We'll go ahead and leave it there. Thank y'all for watching. I hope this has been helpful. Share it on your social media. Share it with people who are confused. Share it with people who are calling us to be disobedient to our bishops. Send this to them. It might help them. We might gain a brother who might be in dissent if what I'm saying is true. So again, try to help share this video. Like I said, hit that subscribe button, hit the like button, and also check me out at patreon.com/reasonandtheology if you want to support what I'm doing here, so I can continue to present content like this, make it available to people at no cost. And also, if you become a patron, you get extra content that I do for exclusive content that I do for patrons and channel members. So certainly keep that in mind. And it also helps, me and my family, stuff like that. All right. See y'all later. God bless. Oh, wait, before you go, I would really appreciate it if you would consider supporting this channel. This is my primary means to provide for my family, and it also helps me to produce content like this video. If you would like to support me, become a patron by visiting patreon.com/reasonandtheology. You'll also get access to extra exclusive content when you become a patron. Lastly, hit that like button and the subscribe button, and be sure to leave a comment down below. God bless.